Welcome to my Revive Ministries Podcast. As we continue to go into May, I'm always reminded of how far mental health has come, but how far we still need to go. I've been saying each time I had this month about an African proverb that kind of makes me think about this process. If we want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. There's a community element to this. I think when we think about, having a background in the faith-based setting, being a leader in it, I'm reminding of how important names are. Anyone who reads anything knows that, but it's also what we're given. The first things that we're given when we're born. And I just think when we think about mental health, we kind of think about everything else besides the individual themselves, besides the family who's trying their best to support and to adjust this new reality. But unfortunately, we forget the individual and that they could just be anyone. They could be a daughter, they could be a son, wife, husband, parent. And the quality and value does not diminish just because they're struggling. But unfortunately, we're still catching up to that reality. Today, we have a new guest. His name is Mark Smith. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight with us today.
Brother, it is so good to be here. And first of all, in this world, I think time is probably the most precious thing we have.
Yeah.
Time. So to the listeners, I would first like to say thank you so much for listening, for watching. You're actually giving us the greatest gift any person could give, and that is their time.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And man, it's a pleasure. And I was just telling our host before we came home, we were laughing because there was a few technical difficulties. And then when the picture got all clear, I said, put back on the technical difficulties. You look better than I do. So I sure do thank you. And to all of you out there, thank you for allowing me to be part of your day. So, brother, I sure do appreciate you.
Yeah, before we begin, I'd like to say a disclaimer, wherever you are and around the world, I do encourage you to find what, I don't like reinventing the wheel. So whether it's a church environment, whether it's just maybe it's a boys and girls club, maybe it's something else, maybe it's just some hobby that you do, maybe you go fishing, whatever that is, I would encourage you to always ask, reach out. As adults, it's hard for us to say, I need help. But in the United States, we do have the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline. If you do need that extra professional help, I encourage you to reach out. It's hard for us, especially if we want to fix it all ourselves. But sometimes we can't fix it ourselves. We need to ask for others to help us. When I was growing up in school, elementary, we read a lot of Mark Twain. And I used this quote. I like this quote. It kind of speaks volumes to me. Kindness is a language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. It's intangible, but what comes to mind when you hear this in relation to mental health and anything you want to share?
Well, I love that because especially in today's society, whether you look at the political scene or just anything, the fact is, it seems like our country has lost or is losing the philosophy that it's much easier to love than to not.
Yeah.
And we look at that, and I remember a few months ago, I would say probably 9 months ago, I was finishing up my book, and it was a memoir called Wrestling with Demons, okay, because I wrestled with my own demons. But as I got to the end, I started seeing where in Chicago there were 40 carjackings a day. I began seeing in Oakland, if you remember, where they had to close the civic offices downtown because people were afraid to get out of their car and walk to work.
Yeah.
And you see all this and you go, my God, yes, we know there's evil. We know there's good. But our country right now needs help. And I'll tell you, brother, I appreciate what you were talking about, the different avenues, and one of them being faith and so forth. I was on a show last week, and we were talking about self-help books.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it's amazing. There's thousands of them out there. And The host said, "Well, yes, yeah, there are. I mean, there are. It's it. I mean, how to raise your child, how to do this, how to do that. You know, they basically tell you how to breathe. There's so many self-help books out there,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
But the problem
Hmm.
is that none of them work, or else the one that worked, people would have stopped writing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
think about that.
Yeah.
And so, what will work?
Hmm.
And I believe it's love. I
Yeah.
really do. I believe it's love, and just me personally, I had to build the foundation of my life on love,
Hmm.
and I came through there to understand that God is love. But now
Hmm.
I'm not trying to push that on anybody. I'm just
Hmm.
saying for me, okay?
Mm.
And
Mm.
uh, so I don't know whether you agree, disagree, or whatever, but our society, it's hurting, brother. What do you think?
Well, I think you're onto something in the sense that there's so much urgency. Like the idea of being valued is being busy. I can't go
Right.
like
Exactly.
I say how are you? Oh, I'm busy. It's no longer I'm okay. Like that's gone. That's like decades before. So I do agree on that, and I do feel even though like I do whatever is positives that gets us out of ourselves. Sometimes we are our own barriers when it comes to
Yes.
care. And working in the mental health field, what I've noticed is also that the sense of urgency and this devaluing nature that we have, how
Hmm.
we I do my best work slow when I slow down. And it sounds funny to say this because I used to you try to do 10 things and you finish none. That kind of thing.
Right. Right. You're
Yeah.
right.
So there is a lot of one other thing that I learned also, being a church leader, also being in the mental health field. Motivation is an interesting thing. You mentioned self-help books, and I don't really think we could teach anyone anything. You can make people think, though. I think Socrates said that. I
Yeah,
don't
I
feel.
agree.
I feel that a lot of times we try to tell people what to do, but there's so many different contexts when it comes to that, and it gets messy. I feel culturally, it's insensitive to kind of just say to someone, "This is how it will work." 1, 2, 3, because their context and their degree of success, and even to go further, because a lot of times we think about health, we think about physical health, and I think
Right.
the problem about that is person may say, "Oh, why don't you do this? It'll make you feel better. You could do this, this, this." Well, the question really should be whether the person wants to be healthy. If they feel that crummy, if they don't like
Right.
themselves, let's just ask the question that's right in the middle of the room. Do I even want to be healthy? So if you're going down the same route and nothing is working, then maybe the avenue is talking about what does success mean to them. And it could just be, I just need to make it through today. That's it. Let's try to improve on today, and then let's worry about tomorrow and try to improve on to that. And the idea is there's no shortcuts to this, at least what I find. I'm not saying there's a set way, but there is, instead of, I think if we take the time to think about what's important to us and actually, surround ourselves with people who encourage us, not just say, "Oh, this is why are you like this?"
Right.
It is
Right.
uncomfortable. I think it's a shoelace dilemma. I remember this. I used to say this. I'm not a parent myself, but I've seen parents. You have a kid. He needs to tie his shoelaces. He needs to tie his shoelaces, and you need to get somewhere that you're already 15 minutes late. Now the question is, do you tie the shoelaces and then and then you get there a little bit closer to the time, or do you allow him to tie those shoelaces? I think a lot of times we we just do not tie the shoelaces for the people, and unfortunately it robs them the ability to kind of feel like they're valued in any way, because then they say you cannot do this.
When you said 15 minutes late, you just made me think of my wife. Okay, all the time. We've been married almost 32 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm.
and we've dealt with a lot of trauma
Mm.
because we have three biologicals, but we also adopted five,
Mm. Yeah.
two sibling groups.
Mm-hmm.
One, they're mother died of a brain aneurysm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably the most heartbreaking thing that I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we went to the DCS office, Department of Children's Services, I'm in Tennessee, and that's what we call it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we went to DCS, and we opened up the door, and the oldest one, who was, I don't know, he's in the Army now, doing incredibly well, and we're very proud of him. But he looked up at us with the saddest eyes, and he said, "Will you be our mom and dad, mommy and daddy?"
Mm-hmm.
And in society, I do feel like a lot of people are out there wanting a friend.
Mm-hmm.
But my gosh, the media, don't they just point? I mean, if it's not bad news, they're not going to report it. You know what? It's got to be bad news.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have somebody that literally is trying their best and they're on the edge, I mean, I'm telling you, the media will make you feel like your life is over.
Mm-hmm.
And it's horrible. I mean, being a former professional wrestler, okay, I counted up, and the number of guys that were younger than 50 years old. I'm 57 now. I've been out of the business. Well, I'm actually in the business again now, but I was in the business like wrestling the Ric Flairs, the Undertaker, stuff like that. Okay, back in the 80s, and it's just ungodly the amount of people that I worked with that died before they were the age of 50.
Yeah.
Some of them self-medicated because of the unhappiness in their life.
Yeah.
And then two of our sons, adopted sons, there's the sibling, their mother died of a brain aneurysm. They watched her die. And about a year and a half ago, their cousin walked into a bathroom and blew his brains out.
Yeah.
And his brains were on the ceiling.
Yeah.
Man, and you know what? He went to the therapeutic office that was treating him, and they said that we will not prescribe you your meds right now. He said, I'm out of my meds. We won't do it. We'll do it on Tuesday. Over the weekend, he killed himself.
Yeah.
And so, just as you have, I'm sure, we've seen enough trauma for a lifetime.
Yeah.
When I go to the movies, people ask, "What kind of movies do you like, Mark?" I say, some fantasy feel good. Well, why don't you want to go to this other? I mean, it just made me cry, or it just, whatever. I said, my God, there's enough bad stuff in the world to cry about.
Yeah.
I don't want to pay to cry. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I know for me, I don't, after, seeing a lot, and then, just like you're describing, it's hard to want to see more of it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yes.
I would say also, when you mentioned the media, it's also, let's say I feel bad. This is the thing about mental health. If I feel like I am less than dirt, okay? And you say to me, no, you're not less than dirt. Now, I could have all the accolades. I could have everything that makes it seem the supporting evidence that I'm not less than dirt. But the fact of the matter is, if I'm convinced that I'm less than dirt, I will feel I'm less than dirt. Now,
exactly right.
The problem is people are like, well, that's not factual and rationally true. Like you've achieved this and that. The point is that, when we think about emotions, like I give this example, and I think is kind of interesting because it kind of debases when it comes to truth. So let's say I get upset with you. I'm upset with you. And then I find out what I was upset about wasn't true. Okay.
Right.
But my upsetness was disproportional to what I was upset with. A lot of times we're just told, it's not a big deal. I would kind of, for me, at least for me, from my experiences, I would ask myself, why did I get so upset? go a little further with it. Yeah. Truth wise, yeah, it wasn't. He didn't really do that, and that's comforting. However, why was it that important? Why
I
did it
think I
bother
know
him?
where you're going.
Yeah,
You're thinking about projection.
yeah,
Am
yeah,
I correct?
yeah. And like a lot of times we say because the emotion is not accurate to the reality, then we dismiss it, which I disagree because that's an opportunity to find out a little bit more what may be going on. I
Right.
mean, not so. At least that's the ambiguity of mental health. It's not that it's correctly lined parallel with what's happening in reality, and that's why it's hard to see
Right.
how to
Well,
notice.
I can tell you, excuse me. I Before I had my tryout with the Atlanta Braves,
Mhm.
I was, in fact, 2 months away from reporting to spring training, and my stepdad at the time, wonderful guy, uh, he had a major pill problem.
Mhm.
He was taking between 20 and 30 Percodan and Percocet a day.
Mhm.
Now, he was doing this because his first wife died of cancer.
Mhm.
He began taking her pain pills for his so that he wouldn't hurt. I mean,
Yeah.
basically. Well, he
Mhm.
attacked me one day. My career was over. Boom, boom, boom. Now, I can talk about things that way
Mhm.
because as a child, my dad would hit me with his fist.
Mhm.
And I'll totally admit to you, I slept with a baseball bat.
Mhm.
There were days that I would have killed him.
Mhm.
Okay? I mean, really.
Mhm.
But see, I found out later that he was beaten with chains as a kid.
Mhm.
Now, we were talking about projection and all these kind of
Mhm.
things. I'm 57. When my dad
Mhm.
was young and being beaten with chains, there was nothing called mental health out
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Therefore, he held things in.
Yep.
And I use the analogy of a champagne bottle. You
Mhm.
put all those hurts in there and you cork it, sooner or later, that baby's going to bust.
Mhm.
And so, and I went down the same road. Long before I met Brenda and we had kids and so forth, I was married. I was verbally abusive.
Mhm.
I was scum of the earth. You know, that's the book, Wrestling with Demons. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, the thing is, uh, when I found my faith,
Mhm.
I think from what people say, it's the hardest thing that a person can do. But for me, it was a no mark. You have to.
Mhm.
So there wasn't no me arguing with myself about it,
Mhm.
and that was I had to take responsibility. I had to take ownership.
Mhm.
I screwed a lot of people. I
Yeah.
admit.
And a lot of times, when you're sharing, I was thinking about there's something freeing about accountability, and sometimes it's always seen as a negative. When you're working, like you're, how you say, working the problem. A lot of people don't
Mhm.
do that anymore. It's little bits and pieces. Obviously, I encourage hope. I encourage stories. I just of that brought someone from where they were to where they are. I feel that a lot of times these conversations and in a faith setting gets
Mhm.
pulled under the rug. I know being a leader that people are complicated. You could have someone who just beat cancer in the front, and everyone's like, "Amen, hallelujah," and then in the same congregation, someone lost a family member the last week, and no one called them. I know this, and I just know
Oh, it
that it's
happens.
very
Yeah.
complicated. So,
Yeah.
why do I mention this? Because I feel what a lot of times we tend to try to um, when I went to church, I didn't want to go to church. And the funny
Right.
thing about it, I was good with sound. Like I was decent. I did it before, and
Okay.
I did all that stuff. So, I was asked to do the sound, and I said to myself, "Well, I'm not even listening to what they're saying because for me, also it's such a disposition towards it." And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, there's always seasons of that. It's not that the more I know, the more less I know. Is how I feel. So as I grow older and know more, I realize how little I really know.
Yeah,
It's
that's
kind
the
of
thing. Yeah, hey, that, Bubba, look, this is gonna tie in so well. Okay, uh, I told you about the trout with the Atlanta Braves, right?
Mm,
Well, my mom, in her great wisdom and in her voice, Mark Smith, she said, "You're going to go to computer class," and so yeah, I did. I went to college to study computers.
mhm,
Now, the thing about it is, I was confused because I had ended up in the same place as I was when my dad was hitting me. I
mhm.
was afraid. I
Yeah.
did not know what my purpose was. I did not really know my identity. I thought my identity was going to be a baseball player.
Mhm.
I was so lost that I was trying to find out who I was by what I could do,
Yeah.
not by my character or
Mhm.
my heart.
Yeah.
So in this, uh, you know, the John Hancock, confused with, like I said, with John or Jack Daniels, and the passing out in the typing class and spelling Gluberschnuben.
Mhm.
And my professor just lifted my head, and when I told her it was a foreign language, she said, "God bless you," and just laid my head down. She knew there was no hope for me. I
Mhm.
mean, people knew what was going on with me. They could tell I was lost in life.
Yeah.
Your educators, for the most part, are pretty smart people.
Mhm.
And so at the end of the year, I found out that my grade point average is 1.11.
Mm.
Now, first of all, I'm going to tell you, brother, it, it took a lot of work to be that stupid. No kidding. Okay. It took a lot of work.
Mm.
I feel like I should have got a cap and gown. It may have been a shower cap and a nightgown, but I should have got a cap and gown. So anyway, I get a letter,
Mm.
and it's from the school. And it's not one of these, "We regret to inform you," or whatever. It was just, "Mark, please go, leave." And I think they gave me like $10 in gas as a scholarship so I could
Mm.
get my rear end off campus. Now,
Mm.
you have people that graduate cum laude.
Mhm.
You have people that graduate summa cum laude.
Mhm.
I graduated good laude because they was glad my behind was off that campus. so, the thing is this. See, I was fortunate
Mhm.
that the right people came around me
Yeah.
and that I was willing to give God another chance.
Mm.
I was able to process. When you process, it's
Mm.
amazing how things in the past don't seem quite as bad. You can talk about them. You can laugh at your mistakes because none of us are perfect. I don't know anybody named Jesus. I know a couple Jesuses, but I don't know
Mm.
anybody named Jesus.
Mm. I was thinking, switching gears. Robin
Okay.
Williams. Remember Robin Williams?
Oh gosh, yes.
This quote kind of stirs me of what we're talking about. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always. Robin Williams was, a lot of people know him from the movies and how he was just so energetic, so
Oh
like
yeah.
it was mesmerizing. Some of his movies, I remember, even the one in Vietnam. What?
Good
You know,
Morning
Good
Vietnam.
Morning Vietnam. It was,
Adrian Cronauer was the
yeah,
character he was playing. Good Morning Vietnam. I remember.
yeah, and then Patch Adams. So you got a lot of different movies that stood
Yeah.
out to me, but for me, he was also one that understood this concept. He was, understood that, you know, I remember there was I read about him also always trying to get the homeless community wherever he shot a film to be the extras, and I thought that
Hmm.
was interesting. He always tried to help. He never saw himself as above others, and at
Right.
least well, the stories I've heard, and I feel that kind of adds to what our conversation, part of our conversation is about. what comes to mind when you see this quote, or anything you want to share or add to this?
Everyone you meet is fighting a battle
Mm-hmm.
you know nothing about. Be kind. I that's very close. As a youth minister for years and as an associate pastor for years,
Mm-hmm.
it says kind of in a way what I say,
Mm-hmm.
and that is, you never know what my saying was. You never know what's going on behind somebody else's closed doors.
Yeah.
Um, and talking about Robin, I wonder,
Mm-hmm.
were the movies therapeutic for him
Mm-hmm.
so that he could reconcile that momentary bout with depression? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, yes, everyone is fighting a battle.
Yeah.
Right now, one of the biggest battles people are facing is they're really, I mean, think about it. Just the use of common sense, knowing
Mm-hmm.
what's good and knowing what's bad, knowing what'll hurt people, knowing what won't hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, being kind, understanding that you know, why be so selfish?
Yeah.
I mean, people. I think of people that always deck out in the name brands, and if you, well, listeners, if you do, that's fine. It's your business. Are you doing that because you like the clothing, or is it because it makes you feel like you belong somewhere or to a group?
Mm. Yeah. And I remember I was just recently I went to a conference, and one of the speakers at a breakout session that really stood out to me. He was talking about PTSD people, and
Mm-hmm.
he's a licensed you know, social worker, and he kind of pointed out about Adler. We always think about Freud, Jung,
Mm-hmm.
but Adler talks about belonging a lot, and a lot of the military kind of adopt some of the battle buddy kind of idea. So
Mm-hmm.
the question he pointed out that kind of sticks to me, it's been about a week, was would your client, would the person you're supporting, would would you fight for them? A lot of us will say, yeah, I'll fight for them. But the question that he asked afterwards was even more compelling for me. Would that person, would that client, would that person you're supporting fight for you? It's interesting to think it that way. The idea is like, not will you fight for them, but will they fight for you? And I feel that really tends to lend to the person's character, and just accountability, and the necessity of belonging. We felt it during COVID. I just remember saying, I remember saying to myself, like, I didn't realize what I missed until it was not there. Like
Mm-hmm.
going to a store and like
I
having run
know,
out.
really.
Like, so,
Exactly. I want a popsicle. Where's the popsicle?
I want to also say, along that same line, the same thought. I thought of Maya Angelou. She says it this way. I always
Mm-hmm.
like this quote, especially this one. It says, "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." I
Oh,
think.
how that all goes back to how we relate to one another.
Mm,
I mean, what is the message we're sending? You and I have not talked very long, man. You're a brother, man. I would sit down and have dinner with you or do whatever else. I I'm interested to hear what you think. You know
mm,
what I mean? And I
mm,
consider you a friend.
mm,
When I come out of Walmart, of all places,
mm,
people say at times I'll go, "Hello, how you doing? Hey, brother, how are you?"
mm,
I've had a few people stop me. Why are you so kind? I
mm,
said, but brother, it's a lot better than hating.
mm,
I mean, look, some of these, brother, some of these answers, when you think about them, they're
mm,
really simple. It's
mm,
the world that makes them seem so complicated. And
mm.
you know, I've come so close to saying it a few times with you because you have come right there. I mean, it's so cool, man. You've like, I mean, you've just given me spunk, in this And that is when I wrote the book Wrestling with Demons.
Mm-hmm.
Quick plug there. That's all. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, our interview has been about us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the thing is though, is you can never wrestle the demons in your heart, in your mind that has been introduced to you through trauma. Those
Mm-hmm.
things, I call them the uglies. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? The things that just won't let you go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I believe a major reason why so many people are carrying around their demons is because they won't acknowledge them.
Mm-hmm.
They say for an alcoholic, the biggest step is admitting that you drink and you're an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
Does it work the same way when we wrestle with demons, our inner demons? That if we, because how are we going to fight them if we don't acknowledge them?
That's a very good point. A lot of times, any step, or that's why self-reflection and understanding what is going on,
Mm-hmm.
like when I mentioned the whole emotion thing, is important. Not because it's going to solve everything today, but you collect enough pieces together, you start saying, well, hey, maybe there's something there. Maybe I'm more angry than I should be. You have more evidence to base on. Maybe you get some help. So those are kind of insight that may be helpful. But also the idea is, you mentioned before, I was going to say before, but unfortunately, you know hurt people, and that's the reality.
That's right.
Unfortunately, I could be, if we're not handling what we're hurting or processing, there's a chance that we may hurt the ones that we don't expect. And unfortunately, due to that, there's a concept called moral injury that comes into play. That moral injury is like, I will never be like my father. Let's just say that as an example. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if he was the one, just as an example. But then I turn around and do the same exact thing to my son or daughter. And then I can't even look at myself in the mirror
Mm-hmm.
because of that moral injury. On top of that, there's, you know, before we get ahead of myself, I do want to say that a lot of times when this process a lot of times gets hurried, like we said in the beginning with the whole, um, and unfortunately, I use this analogy with basketball. I'm thinking about
Mm-hmm.
back in the day when you played. If I was a high school like top star athlete in basketball, and my dream was only to be MVP, NBA champion, all that, right? That was for me the ideal of success. The problem with that is one of two things will happen. one, one of two things may happen. One is I don't get to be NBA champion. I don't become the MVP. And the second, and sometimes more likely, is I start to hate basketball.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So the thing that
Right.
sometimes we forget and ignore the process itself. I just want to mention that before I want to segue to actually. A lot of times, I have you did the plug, and I encourage it. I'll get the information on the book. Those who are listening, if you want to check it out, go ahead. It'll be in the notes when this airs. But I also like to give guests an opportunity to share a little bit of the story. What got you to where you're at today? I know you said a
Well,
little bits and pieces, but I want to give you an opportunity to
okay.
share to those who,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, it was feeling lost as a child because of my
Hmm.
father. My mom's a great lady. She did the best she could.
Hmm.
Our home was one that if you would lift maybe a picture, there could be a fist hole
Hmm.
behind that picture. Okay. Just the way it was. I was the youngest of five, and everybody tried to marry to get out
Yeah.
of the house.
Hmm.
And so, with that and with baseball, I found my identity.
Hmm.
Then I went to professional wrestling because I knew a couple people. The son of the former great Chief Jay Strongbow.
Hmm.
Now his name was Mark Scarpa. Mark was a guy that I loved, a dear friend.
Hmm.
And I got word that he went to the back of his family's property, took a gun, and he blew his head off. I ended up having to walk away from pro wrestling because I was actually called to come in and visit our sheriff. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was there. They pulled out tapes with me on it. Now, I was talking about steroids, yes. But because other names were mentioned, this was heavy when they were trying to crack down on them. They were going to cite me for distribution, even though I wasn't, but they were going to cite me for that. I basically told them everything I knew, which was not much. In fact, when I wrote it down and gave it to the sheriff, I said, I'll see you when I get out of prison, because I knew it wasn't enough. They told me I was going for 20 years. The sheriff called the gentleman from the GBI back in, and he said, he looked at him and he said, "Gentlemen, it will not benefit the community whatsoever to put this man behind bars. He's telling the truth." And so he took everything, put it in a manila folder, rubbed rubber bands around it. He said, "Mark, I'm going to put this in my top left drawer. I'm going to trust you. But when you get to that fork in the road, if you take one step toward the wrong side, I will activate, or we'll go forward and charge you with all this." So I'd lost the wrestling business. When I lost the wrestling business for that time, there I am, scared, didn't know who I was, man. And I made the terrible mistake, the worst mistake a pro wrestler can make, and that is I went from being Mark Smith, a guy who wrestled, to the wrestler Mark Smith. And that made me a real jerk. My wife walked out on me, and I could not blame her. I accept responsibility. People ask me in the book, who's the culprit? Is it your stepdad because you lost your pitching career, or is it your dad, for using the fist and stuff when he was younger? The bad guy is me. I found a positive pregnancy test in our bathroom when she left. I didn't know what it was. It was a stick that had pink on the end of it. Okay. I took it to a family member. They told me what it was. And so I continued trying to call for months. No one would pick up the phone. None of her family members would pick up the phone. And I said, I can't blame them. One day, an aunt did pick up the phone. Now, I'm going to say this with the preface that I cannot verify what happened. Okay? I cannot verify it. All I'm going to do is repeat what was said. And this is not to put anyone in a negative light. Okay? Because if you notice, I've not downed anybody or whatever. Even my dad, I explained what made him the way he was. So she said, "Mark, it's been taken care of." Now, I know what that sounds like, but you know what? Here I'm going to go and say it again. If a child died, I was the one that killed that child because I'd hurt that girl so much. So, yeah, I'm sitting in front of you right now saying I may have been a baby killer. I was a professional wrestler who alienated everybody. I created my own hell on this earth. And I was going to prison for 20 years. Finally, I was in such a hole, I looked up and I said, "All right, we got to talk." And as a young person, I hated God because I was wondering why all these other people had this great life. And while my dad was sitting singing in the choir, knowing very well he could beat the crap out of me that night for no reason. And I said, if this is church, I'm walking away from this thing. So what happened? A man tapped me on the shoulder going into a hardware store.
Mm-hmm.
Tap, tap, tap behind the right shoulder. Son, I have a word for you. Yes, sir. You don't have to go to school the rest of your life to be a minister, to be a preacher. This is the exact word.
Yeah.
I think, man, I got words for you too, telling me something like that, and you're going to tap me on the shoulder. I got words for you, pal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was ready to let them fly.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of weeks later, a woman, tap, tap, tap. Son, I have a word for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, man, you must be taking the same drugs as that fella did. And she
Mm-hmm.
said, you don't have to go to school the rest of your life to be a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
That happened at least 5 more times.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had it on my heart. I was supposed to go and apologize to that dean that threw me out because I really did waste that college's resources. Somebody else should have been in that seat and not me.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down and I apologized. She began crying when I told her the story. She began crying.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, here's something I want you to do, Mark. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, go pick up your books and go to class tomorrow. And she thought she was blessing me. I'm going, no, God, I don't want to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
So I got cornered into going to school.
Mm-hmm.
School was a lot different, man. You know, I ended up leaving that school with a 3.5, a 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
Then I met Brenda. And I started going to church. Met Brenda at church. We go to an old-fashioned camp meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, God, am I going to be single or what? Just kind of let me know what's going to happen, please. Let me know something.
Mm-hmm.
After the service was over, do you know what happened, brother? Can you guess? Tap, tap, tap on the right shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
This woman, her hair had went from, I'm guessing, brunette to white to silver to blue, and now she was purple.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she was so old when She Talked Sawdust came out, and I swear I saw Vote for Abe on her dress, okay? Anyway, excuse me. She said, what you have just prayed for, the answer is sitting right beside you.
Mm.
Now, I look to my right, and there's about this 90-year-old geezer, thin as a rail with blue jeans on and, you know, a Western shirt on. I look at him, and I'm thinking, oh, God, no. And then I look to my right, and there's Brenda.
Mm.
She, in about less than a week, came to me. She says, Mark, I need to tell you something. I said, yes. She says, I had a dream. I think I'm supposed to marry a preacher.
Mm-hmm.
So all that happened. I went to school, went to seminary,
Mm-hmm.
grad school. From a 1.11, a guy in grad school averages a 3.75. How does that happen?
Mm.
Right? I mean, this is freaky. And then people ask me, is God real? Okay, we can look through the writings of God, of Tacitus, Lucian, Josephus. We can look all that. We can look and get down to within 40 years, 30 years of the resurrection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Middle Eastern people have actually been tested that they carry tradition closer than any other, if you want to say, group of people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's all they depended on for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
But then something else happened. My little boy, Austin, we were living in Texas. He was 2 years old. I had just done business in Dallas. I was heading home. My wife, Brenda, calls me. She says, Mark, get to Dallas fast. And I said, well, wow, what's going on? She said, it's Austin. What happened? She said, Mark, he was out playing. Then all of a sudden he started turning blue with patches of dark blue on him.
Mm.
She said they took him to the hospital here. They said they got to get him to Dallas immediately, and I'm in an ambulance with them. Come quick.
Mm.
We got there. They took a blood test. They did several blood tests just to
Mm.
make sure. Every platelet in his body was gone.
Mm.
I mean, just that fast, it was gone. They
Mm.
said if your son was to walk outside and skin his knee right now, he would bleed to death before the ER could treat him.
Mm.
For 5 months, that was a living hell.
Mm.
Major amounts of blood tests, coming back the same, coming back the same. Finally, the doctors called us. They said they had something to tell us, and Brenda and I are thinking that, they're going to tell us how much time he's got left. And, that's not a fun conversation, brother.
Mm-hmm.
They start talking, and then they get to a point to where they say, something happened, and we can't explain it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, Mr. and Miss Smith, we saw a miracle.
Mm.
Overnight, 300,000 platelets appeared in his blood, and he's totally fine to go home.
Hmm. Wow. That's
So from the taps to on the shoulder,
mm-hmm.
to being told specifically Brenda was going to be my wife,
Mm-hmm.
and then my son getting healed, and that's what the doctors in Dallas said.
Mm-hmm.
There were no mistakes. He was healed.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I can be in front of you, brother, and be in front of all these listeners and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, I can say, you know what? Yeah, I've had hell in my life, and all of us have, but I want you guys to know something. God does not make junk, and none of you are junk. None of you. If anybody was junk on this earth, it was me. When I dug myself in that hole, I did not deserve a breath. I should not have been allowed to breathe a breath and take a breath away from another person.
Mm.
But if he can do that for me, and yes, I've been suicidal, and I've had the pill stretched across the bed. I've been told 3 times I was going to be in a wheelchair.
Mm.
I'm walking.
Mm.
And next month, I'm going to get back in the wrestling ring and take some with some friends and run some ropes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can be all inspirational and say, don't give up, don't give up. I'm going to tell you what. Today, brother, I'm an author.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about, as of right now, about 1.2 million people, okay, have heard the story, okay? And it's God. It's not me.
Mm-hmm.
It's the man upstairs. I give him the glory for it. But I'm also a television producer.
Mm. I just want to say, your story is so relatable in many ways. I'm thinking about even the resistance sometimes we have. So the kind of struggles we have. I remember when I struggled and got out of the military, and I remember seeing people in support groups. I go to support group. Oh yeah, I go to support group.
Mm-hmm.
You know how bitter I was? I was so bitter because I was during 9/11. I had no time for anything, and then I see these people complaining about what I think at the time as I was hurt. So what the funny thing about that story kind of reminded me of what you were sharing was I for a long time said I'm never going to go support group. I'm not going to do that. These people didn't understand what I had to go, whatever. Later down the road, I ended up going to support groups.
Okay.
Building support groups, and it was one of the best things I did. I would say that to this day. And why was because I myself got out of the way of where I needed to go. Did I ever think I'll be working in the mental health field? Not at all. Not at all, but it's probably the one thing that other people will say to me, "Oh, Robert, you can talk to anyone about anything, anywhere in the world." Like my friends when I was in college and all this stuff. Never took much weight to it. It was always about how productive, how efficient. I wanted to be successful, but someone else's success, whatever that was. And eventually, when I realized that, things are usually, we go around the world to find what we're looking for, it's right in front of you, it's right there.
And when you're bitter,
Yeah,
the slightest comment
yeah,
can hit you in such the wrong way that
hmm,
you hate everybody in that room.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. And it wasn't their fault. Like I don't know what their struggles was. I was just hurting. So eventually, my
Right.
hurt during that bitter time, I couldn't do much healing. I want to share a couple quotes and then get your final thoughts as we wrap
Sure.
up. I really appreciate you sharing and being part and sharing your insight. It's been a really great conversation.
I've
Uh,
thoroughly enjoyed it being with you, brother. I really have.
Jonathan Harnish says the strongest people are not those who show strength in front of the world, but those who fight and win battles that others do not know anything about. I think sometimes the strongest people are the ones who just get up the next day. Sometimes the strongest people, it's not the amount, but there's a lot of context. So I think the micro decisions, especially from my experience and what I've seen, people are like, oh, I should be there. The should have statements. I should be better. I should be here. Sometimes we stay present and just say, I want to be better today. Let's see what I could do better
Mhm.
today. Oh, let me go outside. Let me get out of bed. Let me go for a walk. Oh, I can't. I don't feel like halfway through. Okay, and then these micro decisions that you make each day build up in time.
Right.
I feel that is something that I've experienced. Um, but if you allow yourself, we haven't talked about, but I want to mention real quick,
Hmm.
forgiveness. We always say forgiving other,
That's the key,
forgiving
brother.
others.
That's the end result, right?
Yeah,
Forgiveness.
yeah,
That's the end result to healing.
it is. And a lot of times we think about firstly of who we may have hurt, and that's understandable. But eventually, you gotta forgive yourself
Hmm.
of what because on the end of the day, we try the best we can with what we have. One person and one of the veterans that I've spoke to said life is like playing a bad hand well.
There you go. Understand.
I wanted to say this one real quick and then I'll get your final thoughts. Vulnerability sounds like truth, feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. It's something I want to remind those who are listening when it
Wow.
comes to mental health. You said, you've been through this, um, and going on the faith side. I like the idea of faith, especially when I was working with people. How we see God a lot of times translate how we treat ourselves and others. It's kind of funny when you're a kid, you look at your parents, if they're angry and
Yeah.
judging, you're going to start feeling that to yourself, to others, and treat them the same way. But when you kind of vision, and this has nothing to do with the faith-based portion, but it's we the first people we see is our parents. So what we see in our parents sometimes can really kind of put the, I guess, either the rose tinted glasses or the other glasses, if you
Hmm.
know what I'm saying. So
Right.
I do want to mention there's a lot to get from from what we were talking about today. And I always encourage, even though this is not a proselytizing podcast, I do encourage you to find something bigger than yourself. Don't
There you
just
go. And I appreciate you saying that. Again, just because faith is a part of me, and I'm letting people understand
mm,
how I was approached.
hmm,
How, I mean, it was literally not that I was out searching for it.
yeah,
Okay. But I love this quote, you know, about vulnerability. The
hmm,
thing is this: vulnerability, love, kindness.
hmm,
I learned something a long time ago. I learned it in seminary.
hmm,
And that is, not everybody's going to accept it.
hmm,
As long as you know you attempted to give it, just wipe the dust off your feet and go forward.
yeah,
There is somebody that does need it.
hmm,
understanding if understanding that if you use truth and courage,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're not comfortable in their
Mm-hmm.
weakness, but you use that, you can also understand and that you simply were you're simply not junk. I mean, that's what it boils down to. You're simply not junk. You know, I've always asked an evolutionist, and I
Mm-hmm.
evolution because I believe that we evolve.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, uh, I wonder if there was nothing, where did something start to live? I mean, that's beyond my capability of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so but somebody created something because something had to be created. The first thing had to be created, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So whatever, for me, it's God.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is for you, you talk about that higher power.
Mm-hmm.
If that's your deal, I totally respect it. But you should understand that you're not junk.
Yeah.
You will get hurt when you love,
Mm-hmm.
but the blessings you get from those who do love you will far outweigh those hurts.
I remember someone once said, "You can't really understand peace without war."
Exactly right.
And I would also say, to kind of simplify it for those who feel, and not minimizing, because this month is important for
Yes.
those who are struggling with mental health, is think about a father who got an art, I guess, an art class. The son made an art project,
Hmm.
and it looks like a turd. Looks
Okay.
bad,
All
right?
right.
But to that
Yeah,
father, it's the most precious thing ever.
that's right.
You can never. So that's the concept. What we're really saying, something
Exactly.
bigger than yourself. The ideas, and a lot of times when I even use stuff in the Bible, I just really look at like the Good Samaritan. The biggest
Hmm.
question is not like, obviously the story is very compelling, but really the question is the more interesting to me. Who is my neighbor? And I would
Hmm.
encourage that all of us are each other's neighbor. Stop in that regard. So I
I
want to
love
say,
it.
as we close, mental health is complicated. Some remember that the identity of a person does not stem from the mental health condition, but rather the individual themselves, their names. Let's remember their names. Why do we care? If we're really being honest, we care because it's our daughters, it's our sons, it's our husbands. Mental health is messy, it's inconvenient, but it is something that we can work through. I want to say thank you, Mark,
Hey,
for
brother,
your
you are the bomb diggity. That's what my kids would say. You're the bomb diggity. And for all the listeners, I do appreciate you so much, and I hope you know that everything I said was out of love. Not at all was I trying to offend or anything like that.
Mm,
But my story is my story, just like
yeah.
your story is your story. Just love each other, be kind,
Mm,
and not just love, but allow yourself to be loved.
true. True. Remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries through the various platforms. ReviveMinistryFL.com is our website. This is goodbye from Revive Ministry Podcast. Leaving with the last quote is from Malcolm S. Forbes. He says, "Too many people overvalue what they are not and undervalue what they are."